I used to do that when I was at, my wife and I pastored in Milwaukee at church together for quite a number of years. And they had the lapel mic, and people would say, Pastor, you turn and talk over here because you want to look at everybody, then we can't hear you no more.
Yeah.
I think the rain is...
They melted in the rain.
Got a couple more minutes. Play some music or something.
The rain did stop.
Is it done for the night now, or was it? The radar looked like it was going to come in waves.
Oh yeah, it's
We're safe and dry right where we are.
yeah.
Yeah, good.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. And welcome, everyone, to our Fireside Chat tonight at a Place to Be Spirituality Center here at the UCC Church in Saukville. Welcome again. Welcome to everyone here in this room and the millions that are watching live online. A couple of logistical things in case you don't know. Restrooms can be found out the back door here and to the left up the ramp. It'll be right on your right. So if you do need to use the facilities, go right ahead. We do want to also mention that the Fireside Chat is sponsored with the partnership of Living Hope, Pastor Mark Thompson of Breaking the Chains Church's mission is to be allies among and offer spiritual accompaniment with individuals who reside both inside and outside of incarceration facilities in Wisconsin. This prison congregation provides a place of worship and contemplation to give men, all of whom have spent time in several facilities, an opportunity to enhance their spiritual foundation and to further prepare them for the very difficult challenge of reentry. Registration is requested. So again, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be here. I appreciate the invitation. So thank you all for coming out to a little rainy night. So for those who are here, thank you for being here.
Well, again, thank you. And I thought that maybe we could start with, if you wanted to maybe go into greater detail of what the services, action steps are that Breaking the Chains Church provides.
Sure. So Breaking the Chains Church was started inside the Felmers Cheney Correctional Center on the corner of Fond du Lac Avenue and 30th Street in Locust, if you know Milwaukee at all. And it's what's called the Wisconsin Department of Corrections has maximum security, medium, minimum, and and then these pre-release centers. And the gentleman who, it's all male facility, there's a female facility elsewhere. Gentlemen who are there have kind of checked all the right boxes, done all the programs, are not, there's whatever the, and they can come to the change center or any of the, I think there's 9 across the Uber law, and then they start really getting ready to be out when their sentences are done. And so that, of course, has been cut back these last few months because of COVID, so they are not working at our facility. About 7 or 8 years ago, there was a retired pastor, Joe Elwanger, who started taking men because they could get release privileges to church on Sunday morning. He retired and he took them to his church, which is just down the road on Locust, Tabitha Lutheran Church. And 7 years ago, just taking 4 men a week, every week. After about 5 years, they realized that there was no spiritual presence ongoing inside. And so the idea for our church was formed, and I've been the pastor there now for years. So I'm in there on a pre-COVID basis. I go there on Wednesday mornings, just hang out in the dining room. I call that job selective loitering. And I can just be there, guys can come out, and so they I'm known now there as kind of the pastoral entity. I've been there longer than any of the folks who have been there. Like I said, they're usually at the end of their sentence when they're transferred to the Cheney Center. And then Wednesday night we do a Bible study, and I say we have a steering committee that's from a bunch of different churches. They're the ones that put it all together originally. And all of them and about 10 other people have gone through the Wisconsin Department of Corrections volunteer training. So they get to come in for Bible study on Wednesdays and worship on Saturday nights. So our worshiping community is whatever men decide to come, and then 2 or 3 or more of us who are volunteers. And that's then the church. And the church was named early on by a couple of the men after a song, so it's Breaking the Chains Church. And we are located there. The church is in the Cheney Center. And so that's the only one like it in Wisconsin. There's about 37 congregations that are affiliated that have been kind of founded the same way. So yeah, I'm in there, and that's the main piece of being a spiritual presence on the inside, and then organizing the volunteers and worship and so on. And we're just expanding out. Really, some of it pushed because of the COVID situation to now including ministering and walking alongside people as they've come out. There's other organizations that do that too, with Project Return in Milwaukee and some other places. But really walking with the guys as they come out, finding an apartment, furnishing an apartment. We've done that. Faith Lutheran in Cedarburg bought all the kitchen utensils and everything for one gentleman when we put out the call. And so we're doing that, and we've set aside $5,000 for the last 3 months, and we've been paying rent, transportation costs, and food costs for about half a dozen people. And so those are that were connected to us inside, now out within the last year. And it was rough for a lot of people. I'm sure you know a lot of people. Loss of jobs, not getting unemployment, being denied, and so on. So we've walked with them, and every one of them is working now, and so our support, that financial support, will be available for the next round of folk who come out that we're working with.
Thank you. Just curious, if you wanted to talk to us about what the difference is between a jail and a prison.
A jail is a municipal or a county facility. That's a jail. County jail, city jail. A prison is the Wisconsin Department of Corrections facility or a federal facility. So it's either state or federal. So local is a jail, state or federal is a prison. Often they're kept in the county jails until they're go through a trial or they plea out and then they're sentenced. And once they're sentenced, everybody goes to Dodge up in Waupun area, and they all go there, and then it's figured out which facility they go to next from there. And so then you're in the prison system. And then you're moved around a lot. Once you're, say if you're doing 5 years, 10 years more, you'll probably make 3 or 4 moves during that time from one facility to another.
Thank you. I have no idea. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind, describe to us what prison and or jail ministry is like, and really if there's, a difference between the two for logistical reasons or what have you.
Well, the big thing I think to clarify is that there's a thing called a chaplain, right? And a chaplain is generally hired by the institution. So almost all the max, mediums, and minimum facilities have a chaplain. And then, of course, the chaplain, like Father Mulcahy in Mass, right, is responsible for all people in denominations and in spiritual care. And so that's the chaplain. But it is a position that's hired by the state in the case of the DOC. The county, like I know down in Franklin, the House of Corrections, they have a chaplain there. The downtown county I don't believe, has a gate chaplain that's hired for the facility. So then prison ministry becomes being the pastor to people who are incarcerated. Along with the families who have family members who are incarcerated. I've been getting to go talk to folk for about 3 years now, and I would say out of the 30 congregations that I've been to, maybe 2 of them, somebody didn't come up after I either preached or talked and said, we have a family member incarcerated. And I'm talking about from this county and everything in between and out west, right? Every county, certainly in the city. But that's surprised me, which is why we've launched into really another arm of the ministry that we have a task force that took over is Congregational Support, helping folk know how to pastor. And so that's really prison ministry. And then there's a lot of little pieces like letter writing. That's prison ministry. Visitation. We have a subgroup that's doing advocacy. In other words, they'll look, if I'm going to a church near Oconomowoc, we'll look at what bills are before the state right now, and then see who their representatives are from that area, and go prepared to share information with them about that, so they can look into it if interested. So there's that whole advocacy realm. And we partner with them, like I've said it before. Project Return is something to look up, just to see an organization that's on the ground for 40 years as a nonprofit. It's almost unheard of in Milwaukee. And they walk with formerly incarcerated persons, everything from start to finish, including mental health, including AODA counseling, and then housing and everything else. We do that for the people we know. They do it for everybody.
Is it fair to say that the ministry has more to do about listening and less to do about talking?
It is very appropriate to say that. I think what I've come to share and understand and notice is that I don't bring anything to the table except being inside, just being at the table. I have nothing spiritually or biblically to offer many of these men. Some, they have great questions and we talk, but others are such scholars and such people, witnesses of deep faith, that I just sit there in awe and just sit there. So a lot of silence, answering questions, waiting to be asked, and that's always been hard for me. I always have a lot of ideas I want to tell everybody.
And as most humans do. Absolutely. Thank you so much. What would you say to someone who is potentially interested but apprehensive about getting involved in prison or jail ministry?
Well, like all things, it's a conversation, and it's first and foremost to beyond that, equally as important is to identify from where they came. What was the groundwork of that apprehension? And so to look at the sources of our information. So that just, that would be where I would start with somebody, just to figure out kind of what's going on there. And it kind of goes back to what I was just saying. I would say this, that approaching prison ministry as if you are going to be the one who's ministered to. And I had an amazing woman who introduced me to the Lakota community in South Dakota many years ago, and she had been a missionary in South Africa during apartheid as a Presbyterian woman, almost like a Presbyterian version of a nun, and was tortured for choosing to live with the native folks that she was ministering in the midst of. And I got to have her as a professor 20 years later when she still had a bad back from the torture. And she totally taught us about mission in reverse. She first came to Lakota with these blankets and thought she was doing such good work coming out of Chicago and driving all the way out to Rosebud, and here's some quilts we made, and as if she had something to bring that these people needed, right? And over time she not only learned but taught all of us that, yeah, I am ministered to. That's what I mean by I bring almost nothing to the table except to come to the table. And so I think that approaching it that way is really helpful. And then, when you identify, so are you afraid when you're inside? Okay, when we talk about the safety. Are you afraid to drive into that neighborhood? Now, that's a huge one. And so then we work through that. Carpools, I'll meet you wherever, and those kind of things. And then very practically, if somebody really is thinking about wanting to get involved, either doesn't know where to start or is apprehensive, call Joe Dorr at Faith Lutheran in Cedarburg and talk to him about it. And I'll let him know that I said his name. He's the perfect person. He took the volunteer training because I cajoled him to, and apprehensive would be a perfect word. And he's now just sits in awe at that table. Wow. At Bible study or at worship when he comes inside.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So I'm serious about that. If somebody is apprehensive, contact me. My contact information is available through here, and I'll put you in touch with folk who can just speak right to where you're thinking and feeling.
Absolutely. Yeah, if anybody needs Pastor Mark's contact information later, just please see Kelly. Why don't we just actually go back just a couple of years? And I thought, could you share a bit about your faith practices while you were growing up, and how you're the same or different than your faith practices today, and maybe to where you are today?
Yeah, well, like all of us, and as one of my mentors said, when you're on your spiritual journey, sometimes you're just plowing forward, you don't even know what you're doing, or you're in dry spells, or you're overwhelmed, but you really don't always kind of know what the path is, and occasionally God will let you turn around, and you'll see from where you came, and you go, oh, that's why I'm here, and then you plow in forward, into the wilderness. So, as a kid, my mother took, because my wife and I are both pastors, our children are PK squared. We've discerned, because my mom was so active and knew every pastor in town and ran every vacation Bible school in the summer, and that I almost had that PK kind of experience too. So church was just everything. It's just what we did. There's still stories I think of me coming up with dust on because I'd gone into the pews and stuff like that. So it was just one part of what we did. In terms of through the years and how it changed, I have been very clear about saying I have never yet felt called to be a pastor. I did feel a strong need and call to be in the midst of incarceration issues. I worked with adjudicated youth in Florida right out of college as a special ed the Everglades for 4 years. And I went to seminary to figure out how to reach these kids before they got to where we had them incarcerated. And so here I am at the back end of my career, back inside incarceration. So that there is a full circle for me that's there. But you know, it evolved. Like I remember in college being asked, I was in the running for a presidential scholarship. What are the 5 most influential books you've read in your life and why? You know, Grapes of Wrath, I said. Haunted Yo, which is about American Indians. And I said a couple others. Dune by Frank Herbert. And then I don't remember the other one. And I was searching for the number 5, and all of a sudden I said, well, I haven't read it all yet, but does the Bible count? Oh my gosh, they all went, and I got the scholarship. And so really the Bible has been, you know, a steady piece, but that's what's really changed. As a kid, I was a stellar confirmation kid only because I cranked through all the work quickly. I didn't learn much of anything. Now I've been immersed in you know, I took a little bit of Greek, I got to read some Hebrew in seminary, and then just have been immersed with, again, a broad swath of people and have been through the book several times. And so that's really changed. You know, the only other thing I would share just about those early years, that my mother passed in 1990 before I went to seminary. My mother told a family friend when I was in 7th grade that I would be a pastor someday. Yeah, wow. So, yeah.
Well, mothers know best. Nope. Thank you. I was going to ask you next then, who has had the most influence on you from a spiritual perspective? And maybe it's more than one individual, and who has served as a spiritual mentor for you? Again, maybe it's you.
Yeah, it's several persons. Yeah, well, certainly I go right back to, you know, my mother when I was young. It was just, she not just did all the church stuff. We were the ones that organized all the funerals for the church. I was the one who carried casseroles up to the door, and she was in the car waving, saying, "Sorry for your loss," right? So it was put into practice. So that clearly was an influence on me. And I talked about my growing up years in Cedarburg. The pastor there, Ron Mock, was very influential. Dr. Joyce Caldwell, some of you know, she was our youth pastor back in the day. So she's the person I called when I was going to go to seminary to ask where I should go. She's currently, for those who know the ELCA, our Synod Vice President too. But then as an adult, just some very clear people. Reverend Dr. Pete Perro was the first African-American professor of theology at a Lutheran seminary. And he was a friend and a colleague of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend Jesse Jackson. And he was very instrumental in bringing me into, along with Claude Marine Barbour, who I mentioned before, into realizing that urban realities are a spiritual practice. Justice is a spiritual practice. And so that's very important mentors. And the ones who have kept that going, they're both retired now, but I'm very much in touch with and listen to and sit at the feet of Reverend Ken Wheeler and Reverend Joseph Ellwager. Joe, Pastor Joe. Anybody know Pastor Joe? Just raise the hand if you've heard. Oh, look him up. He's an icon in Milwaukee and has lived the history. His daddy was the first white man to pastor a black church in Alabama in the 40s and 50s. And that apple hadn't fallen far from that tree at all. And he's married to Joyce Ellwager, who has been a nationally known pacifist activist and did 6 months. She's a formerly incarcerated person, did 6 months at the Women's Federal Penitentiary in for civil disobedience intention. So those are my mentors that are, you know, some in the past, some I still sit at the feet of.
Those are some incredible mentors. Perhaps, if you wouldn't mind, you went into some detail a little earlier, but could you share with us some other stories about people who have transitioned from incarceration to returning citizens
Yeah.
interesting stories there would be great.
Yeah. So, I'm going to tell first a story about somebody who's still incarcerated, because that leads into working with people as they come out. So I just want to briefly talk about a young man who was 26, had of European descent, had a no-knock warrant put on the south side of Milwaukee because of somebody who was being investigated for selling illegal guns, gave up this young man, even though the young man was not guilty of anything. The other guy was just trying to get out of something worse for himself. And in the end, there was nothing illegal found. Guns, drugs, none of that was there. But as they executed the no-knock warrant at about 5 in the morning, this young man grabbed his legally owned gun and shot through the door, and an officer died in the line of duty. When that happened, that night, that next Wednesday night, I was inside, and we were having Bible study, and somebody said, "Hey, did you hear that man, that kid that shot that cop? His uncle's here." And the next week, one of the guys who came pretty regularly and had spent more time in the morning just talking to me and stuff, he brought the uncle out and said, "Man, you got to talk to him." And so now it's the uncle of the young man who pulled the trigger, and I became his spiritual support. And I asked, he kept talking about his mother, which was the young man's grandma, and he was living upstairs and her being downstairs. And I said, "Is anyone helping her, taking care of her?" "No, not at all." I said, "Well, next time you talk to her, ask her if she wants me to come visit." So now I've become the pastor for all three of them. And they're very involved in breaking the chains. The grandma has come to a big forum we did, Together in Mission event, spoke to 50, 60 people about her experiences. So when the uncle got out, I was already visiting down there, we totally made sure he got a truck. I think somebody helped him with paying for the title, or getting the license plates put on, stuff like that, and he already had a job. And they had fixed up the upstairs. Well, as two other guys were going to come out, we worked with the family, worked with the men inside, and so now the upstairs tenants are two of our alumni, we call them. And the downstairs tenants is grandma, and her son is an alumni. So it's all of a sudden the alumni house, right? And they're renting for her the duplex. And so that's a huge story. I mean, that's the relationships leads to, and then just concrete. Working with people who are in reentry is being very concrete, finding out what they need, and then seeing if you can surround them with the opportunity to fulfill that need, right? And so I talk on the inside about that with some of them, and especially finances can go haywire in a heartbeat when you get out. And it's all about finances, right? As long as you have a place to live and transportation to get to your job, I mean, you're progressing. You're not heading back in. And so those are a couple of stories that we walked very, very specifically with. And then there's a gentleman who got out a year and a half ago, and he's now on our steering committee. And he just has wanted spiritual guidance. So I get together with him every 2, 3, 4 months, and we just walk in the park and talk. And then I go to him when somebody's newly out and say, "Man, I'm worried about this, such and that," and he'll just come right back and say, Yep, that's exactly right. I did that too." So we're setting up through relationships a mentoring program for formerly incarcerated helping. And again, we're tied into other networks that are already doing that. And so it's the more the merrier, right? This kind of work in so many ways, especially with around incarceration, it's really about one by one connecting. There's no so that we can actually be intentional about focusing on reentry, returning citizens. And that's a big piece. Let me just say one word on that. This citizenship. Our formerly incarcerated men and women come out and are not treated as if they have equal citizenship. Well, they do. Absolutely, they do. It's laid out in the law when they can do this and that and the other. But it's such. Most of us don't recognize it that way. There's something still wrong with that person, and that culture makes reentry difficult on every single front. I call it the surroundness. Not just one thing, it's everything is harder. It's like poverty. When you're surrounded by poverty, transportation is more difficult than it is for us. Access to healthy food is more difficult. Housing is an issue. Job security is an issue. Violence right around our neighborhoods is an issue. Right? That's the surroundness that comes with that. So the same with incarceration. And it's particularly difficult for people who have been sentenced to some sort of a sexual crime. It's so isolating by definition and then by attitude.
I have more questions I want to ask you, but we should take some time to open up to the audience. And are we getting questions online as well?
Not yet,
People
but
pop them in, so we encourage that as well for the millions at home watching to send in their questions. But yeah, to open it up, if anybody has any questions, feel free to share them with Pastor Mark. And if you wouldn't mind, so folks at home can hear when people ask a question, maybe repeat it and, and then answer it. So open it up to you folks. Mark?
If I understood from the beginning, your time is fairly short with these individuals because we're transferring facilities and kind of the end point. As a pastor, what's your hope to be able to impact them, and what's the reality of your impact on them?
Thank you for that question. The question was, what's the hope for impact of my presence inside the Cheney Center, and what's the real reality of that impact? And you started by saying that the time is short, and that's right. It's short in several ways. I'm only allowed inside 2, 4, 6 hours a week. So we'll slowly work on how to increase that so I can just be present. And of course, I'm inside no hours for the last 3 months, 4 months now. What we're doing is making DVD services, and they're showing those inside. And I'm writing all sorts of letters to the people I do know inside. So the hope for impact is that somebody will sit down and talk to me. That's absolutely the hope for impact. And then when I know there's an effect from that impact is when I'm asked questions or sought out for something in particular. And so I hope that it'll become just part of the culture of that place, that there's this Breaking the Chains church, and man, they help you. And that help you could be whatever, spiritual, physical, all sorts of things. And I hope that the impact will be people will come more and more who really do need support when they get out. And I, and Breaking the Chains and myself are connected in the prison ministry world in Milwaukee and in the state. And so can access all sorts of organizations and agencies and legal support quickly. And so that I hope more and more folk would know that inside and would seek it out. That would be a great impact. So as pastor, I get to be inside so I can tell them what I know. And that's important. Give, information, somebody can tell me, ask me to go look something up, and I can, and I come back and report what I found, because there's not internet access inside. And the bridge piece is huge now, and I think I'm well situated to be. I left a full-time congregational ministry to take this call. So Project Return, I'm on their board of directors and have been there for 10 years. And through that, I've gotten to know the prison network. And there's also a subcommittee of the Southeast Wisconsin Attorney General's office that's on prison work. And so those folk know everything about everything, and I get to be on that email list and can show up at meetings when necessary and helpful. And so just those relationships that I am part of, and then touch others who have even more relationships, and we make sure those people are sitting at our steering committee. So it's really the steering committee that ensures, just like a church board, ensures that all things are happening. But I, as the kind of intersection play point, am the right person at the right time because of connection, because of my own experience and background. And so now, connecting to congregations, that's exactly what we're doing right now, trying to figure out how to do that better. And so we're having some lay folks and others, task forces take on that responsibility, so that, one, we can get information out to people. I've actually got a couple things. This is an action step. Provide opportunities, assistance, and accompaniment for individuals, congregations, and families who are either trying to support incarcerated person or family, or who want to become involved in different ways. So that we provide volunteers to speak via a media platform or in person, as we're doing tonight, with interested groups and individuals, so that they're really going to start doing the work of how do we respond to congregations. And part of that will be, how do we let other congregations know they need to hear what we got to say? How do we invite ourselves to places lovingly? Yeah, because it touches everyone, and that's really what the last 3 years has taught us, and surprised me a little bit, even though it shouldn't have, but that across the whole southeast of Wisconsin, incarceration touches every congregation.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Anyone else?
You had something you wanted to say?
Oh, yes, I did. You had said that it's hard for them to get jobs, get housing, and I'm assuming a lot of that is because when you're filling out applications, the question is, have you ever been incarcerated, or have you ever committed a felony? So what are you, as an organization or as a church, are you trying to fight this? Are you putting some kind of, working with the legislature to?
Yeah, absolutely. And so as a church, we ride the coattails of people who are already doing it well, and they keep us informed, and we help them all when they need it. So Project Return, for instance, we had an opportunity once Governor Evers was in office to sit personally with Secretary Carr, who was the Secretary of Corrections. That hadn't happened in a long time. And so there's very clear connections, and we know which legislators are really, on both sides of the aisle, are really important. Evan Goike is probably the key person that we relate to in the House and the Representative or the Assembly, because he's authoring bills all the time for more just prison sentencing and incarceration rules. Wisconsin, unfortunately, is at near the very bottom of the list when it comes to having some of the harshest incarceration rules. And that's a whole other part of the conversation, and I'm not sure if I should touch on that or not. A story. Kristen and I, my wife and I, were called to church in '96 in Sherman Park. And it was about 90, the summer of '98. My son was already born, so that was in '97. So probably the summer of '98, the city attorney of the city of Milwaukee was busted for using powder cocaine. He got a misdemeanor in 18 months. At the same time, the law written in Madison was that if you had that same weight of crack cocaine, right, powder form, cooked form, same drug, but if you had the same weight, that was a required felony, 10 years. Why, when it's the same drug, were those penalties written into the law so differently? Do you think you have your answer?
No, I read that in one of the books that I just read, Just Mercy, and he talked about that.
Stevenson.
Yeah, he talked about that as being
Right. So this is actually happened in Milwaukee in my ministry time. Who uses powder and crack at the time? By and large, it was white people using powder. By and large, it was people of African descent using crack. So the laws were written in Madison, misdemeanor, felony, same drug, same weight. Well, that's bad policy. That's the white dominion history that we're now coming up more conscious of. Some are in these days and months and years. So that's where it was written in. Well, those have gotten changed. Enough people said, really? Right? So, but there's something called old law prisoners. So even though they were changed, they changed how the previous governor's administration changed how sentencing, the truth in sentencing. There was this whole Newt Gingrich, post-Newt Gingrich wave of getting tough on crime, right? 3 strikes and you're outlaws, right? Truth in sentencing, all these buzzwords. What that did was explode the populations that are people that are incarcerated. You have people doing over 20 years for selling marijuana from that area. And they, unless there's a commutation of the sentence, they got to serve it out. Judges can't do nothing about it because they were truth in sentencing. The judges used to give, they would say, I want you to do 15 years, I'm going to give you 20 and a 75% rule. You can get out 25% earlier if you behave really well and do what you're supposed to. Right? There's an incentive, and so then you get out at 15. So the judge is thinking, if you're right about what you're doing, I want you out at 8 to 10, I'm going to give you 12. Right? And you're going to burn your way back down. Those laws swept the nation, and they said, no, you now have to serve exactly what was given, no exceptions. And because it was written as a law, the judges couldn't overrule that. There was a new law in the state of Wisconsin. Well, that means that the judge wanted him to do 12, and now he's going to do the full 16 because of that law. Well, that also increased, the population, prison population in Wisconsin, mushroomed up to 25,000 people, right? And so it's barely coming back down because we still over-incarcerate.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. I think I saw a hand up over here.
But if anybody else is.
I'm just curious, how is your ministry funded?
Great question.
How is the ministry funded?
How is the ministry funded? So when this group was gathering and realized that there was no ongoing spiritual presence, they organized first a Bible study and got their volunteer training status and just started doing the Bible study. And then they heard about this model of how you plan a congregation, and a national organization came in and helped work with the DOC and the ELCA Lutheran Church in southeast Wisconsin. And that group decided that they would approach 3 grantors. And there was 3 different organizations that basically committed the startup monies for 3 years, which is it takes about $50,000 to run everything, which is basically me, all right, and a few other things along the way. And so that those 3 organizations that we recovered then, and we started getting money in by donations, just as we got rolling, we got started and started talking to congregations. or mission of the month, and we'd get, $500 from the congregation. So that was already coming in, even though we had funding for 3 years. So when the 3 years ended, we were 10 months ahead on cash from what we had made. So the transition in this last year is the steering committee worked hard, and I spent a lot of time with it as well to come up with a financial plan for the next, to be sustainable. And I have studied with Episcopalian out of the Kaleidoscope Institute in California, Reverend Eric Law, and he's very clear, and I think we are embodying this. If you're clear on your mission, sustainability will follow. And so we're clear on our mission, and we're doing it already. And so now we have to organize to make sure we're asking 40 churches to give, 500 to 1,000 a year, and 20 individuals to do the same. And there's a couple of churches and foundations that we really want to support. And so we're going to all that, the 40 and 40. If we get 40 at 1,000 and 40 at 500, that'll cover the costs. But we also are telling 40 stories in the midst of that. And we're using our Facebook page that we just launched 2 weeks ago, telling a story a week. Every Monday we put a story in, and I have some here I can share that with you. And every Thursday we put a Did You Know, incarceration numbers, advocacy work, bills that are out there. Quote Brian Stevenson or whatever, right? And so it's a Thursday nugget and a Monday story. So we're just literally launching that, but we've got that basically a year ahead to get ramped up during this year, to keep ourselves a year ahead.
Is there anybody
Lady,
else?
do you have a question?
I have two. I have 2 questions. Early in the presentation, you made the comment, urban ministry is its own spirituality, or somewhere along those lines, and I'm wondering if you could unpack that, if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Claude Marie Barbeau, Professor Claude Marie, who taught this idea of mission reverse, knows people all over the world. She actually was one of the founders of the Torture Center up in the Twin Cities. And so she's very well known. And she had named wherever we were going to go. And we were, my wife and I, as part of seminary, spent 6 months in Kenya, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, just sitting at the feet of people, listening, learning. It's officially part of our seminary, but we were really on our own for those 5 months. And we were with a Claude Marie person, Shalom Ministries was the name, and it was 2 Cambodian missionaries out of Italy who had always worked among what Pastor in Milwaukee calls it, the least, the last, the lost, and the lonely. And they were ministering, these 2, Father Jani and Father Alex, were ministering in what's around Nairobi, what's called the slums, but what it is when there was the Mau Revolution in the 60s, and all these rural people came flooding to the city to be safe, right? And there was no room in Nairobi. Nairobi is Milwaukee-ish in size. And so they made squatter camps around the outside. Well, 20 years later, those squatter camps have 250 to 300,000 people living in them still, right? And so it's poverty. And here these 2 missionaries go in and they do things like start a recycling program because they're at the edge of the city dump, and now they've got an education building and their own school and a church that was built and a recycling program, and they're a base Christian community. It's the standard model of how that's supposed to work. So here we are traveling with Father Alex, going somewhere. My wife and I, and we're hoofing it along with him, and everywhere he would go, you remember there's hundreds of thousands of people around. The kids would come out, Padre, Padre, Padre! And it was, they would chirp at him, and we were going along, and Kristen was trying to just ask a deep question, and said, so what is it you really do here? Right? And Father Alex just stopped. It was like a cloud of dust dust just rose up because he stopped, and this whole, an entourage just all comes to a stop. And Kristen says, I know immediately I said something wrong. And he looks at her, and he says kind of in anger, because he's got 1,000 things to do right now. He says, I don't do anything. I just love the people. That's the answer to the question. Right, so urban realities tend to be where the poverty is most harsh and less of it can be absorbed. If West Bend has a little bit more ability to absorb the amount of real poverty that's out there, there's the homeless shelter and the churches are doing their thing. I mean, there's always need. But when you exponentially multiply that into a city like Milwaukee, then the Bible's just full of references to where people who are really trying to follow Jesus and God should be. He gives a litany. When did you see me sick? When did you see me in prison? When did you see me? When did you see me without something? That's it. That's the spirituality. That's spirituality because it's what Jesus is calling for, which is really then what God intends and hopes for. And the mechanism is the Holy Spirit, so there's the spirituality piece. So, that's what I'm trying to get at by that. And the most amazing experiences spiritually will happen at places like Alice's Garden in the heart of the city, where urban gardening is building community and it's done with a full understanding of God's presence. So those kind of places, and it's not to glorify it. Poverty sucks. But the poor will always be with you, Jesus said. So these economic systems are always going to misfunction so that there are people who are squashed and kicked out. It's always going to be the case. And so that's I think what Jesus meant by that. Those systems are as long as humans are running them, the systems are in place.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that has
Any other questions? Otherwise, I know this young lady has one more.
at least one more?
I'd say go ahead.
Okay. What do you struggle with in the ministry?
That relates to kind of this one question. One of them that was given to me was, what are the tension points in spirituality for you? What is most helpful for you when those tension points become louder? It feels like it's similar to what you're asking. My tension remains high in the face of social injustice. It just stays high. I sometimes feel like I'm trying to thwart what God would really have me do because it scares the bejeebers out of me. We're talking about taking on some systems that don't play nice, and the only place that can take on those systems, and this is what Dr. King understood, is faith. Is the church. It's the only thing strong enough. Because everything else is a human creation, and institutions are built to not die. And so, other human actions aren't going to do it in, but faith can. And so that gives me nightmares. And one specifically is, we've already talked about, the over-incarceration of African descent men. Right? I say it this way, the unjustified killings of brown and black children of God. And my spiritual tension has been particularly high these last 4 years, as hate speech has been used on a daily basis by our president and by others in power. Because those who are using such vile language are laying claim to the salvation in the name of Jesus. No way, I'm not speaking for them, but there's no way Jesus or God are tolerating this kind of hate that's being spewed forth.
Amen.
So it's a spiritual issue, and a lot of people either don't want to go found out when I took a half-time call, I still had full-time bills. And so people that are at this other job who just see nothing wrong with the tone of conversations and don't understand at all the uproar around brown and black people dying innocent deaths. And so that, I'm still having a hard time being present in that.
To go into, because you had really touched on it, Pastor Mark, when you were talking about some of the challenges. There's a lot of worth in life, right? And one of them is work. And as an employer, and with the availability of CCAP and other online tools, you can just see and there's a lot of pushback.
Word of the DOC, and so they're already in that habit, saving us the taxpayers' money. I think I lost the train of where I was going with that one. Repeat just a little bit.
Just going into the various things can give
Yeah,
folks
yeah.
work that are coming up.
Our efforts, I was know anything about Wisconsin politics. Alberta, darling. That's a good place to be. Change laws at all, even when it's in everyone's best interest to do so. But in the employer's piece, that's a piece to keep working on. And I think that's a place where Breaking the Chains specifically can figure out how to help. Because when I go to a congregation or a talk like this, if you're not to be part of the conversation, but that's a growing edge, is how to use our relationships to get people jobs and to help the employers out. That'd be outstanding. So we're just, if you can help us do that, we'd love it.
I think we'll talk afterward. I think that's about all the time we have tonight, but I would say, Pastor Mark could stick around afterward. And join us. We have, refreshments over here, please. Do stick around and join in some camaraderie and some extended conversation. And thank you again, Pastor Mark, really, for everything that you shared tonight. This is wonderful.
There's one thing that can I just throw it in about 30 seconds here?
Sure.
Your question was, how has your belief helped you practice kindness, compassion, and empathy? And here's my answer. I am such a broken child of God that knowing that God would be willing to lay claim in my life helps me stand in the gaps with people who are often ignored or at the edges of society. As Henry Nouwen would say, I see myself as a wounded healer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just a couple other things. As a reminder, tonight's chat is available on the Place to Be, our Facebook site, and will shortly be posted to the YouTube channel. If you enjoyed tonight's chat, we encourage you to share it with a friend. Also, if anyone was interested, last week we had Brenda Peterson here. If anyone was interested in her contact information, you can just see Kelly after tonight's session and she can share that with you. Fireside Chat will be back next week, July 22nd, and there we will be inviting Ethan Lumen. And Ethan, he is the lead pastor of River of Life Lutheran Church and associate pastor of First Emmanuel Lutheran Church, who oversees adult ministries for both campuses. Pastor Ethan is driven by discipleship and community to help people get connected to Jesus